Hola, I'm Patch, and today we're going to be reading Barbed Wire Baseball, written by Marissa Moss. Zenny watched the wooden bat thwack the baseball, hurling it high and straight. He was 8 years old, and it was the first time he'd seen a baseball game, but he was hooked. "Father, I want to play," he told his dad. "You're too small," his father said. "Too frail," his mother added. But Zenny didn't listen. He had to play. The other kids laughed at him. "Zenny, you're a mouse," one boy hooted. "A teeny tiny one," another kid called. None of it mattered. When Zenny had a ball or bat in his hand, he felt like a giant, and soon he played like one. Many springs had passed since that first game, years of playing in the chill of winter and the sweat of summer. Zenny got taller and stronger and better at baseball. "Why are you wasting time with such a silly game?" his mother asked. "You should study and become a doctor," his father said, "or a lawyer." But Zenny knew exactly what he wanted to do, and when he grew up, he coached, managed, and played baseball in the Fresno Nisi League and the Fresno Twilight League. He was barely 5 feet tall and weighed only 100 pounds, but he was a star player, casting a big shadow in baseball. Zenny was chosen to play with star members of the New York Yankees. He led his teams in exhibition games in Japan. He even arranged for Babe Ruth to play there. But that world collapsed for him when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941. For the first time since he had picked up a bat, Zenny felt as if he didn't measure up. The United States was at war with Japan, and 120,000 Americans of Japanese descent who lived on the West Coast were forced into 10 internment camps, most in the desert. The government considered these Japanese Americans to be possible spies and, without evidence or trials, locked them up. Men, women, and children. American citizens. All were treated like prisoners of war, housed in barracks and penned in with barbed wire. Zenny, his wife, and their 2 teenage sons were sent to a camp in Gila River, Arizona. Outside, the camp was bleak and gray and dusty. Inside, the barracks were stark, with crowded rows of cots and not much else. Families bustled around, trying to make a home out of nothing, hanging up curtains, arranging tea sets on footlockers, piling dolls and stuffed animals on cots. Zenny stood staring at the dry earth, which was broken up every now and then by a few scrubby bits of green, and all the brown and gray with a dull coppery sky overhead. He felt as if he were shrinking into a tiny, hard ball. There was only one thing that could make the desert camp a home: baseball. Zenny unpacked his favorite photo, the one that showed him in uniform, lined up with baseball legends Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig, towering like redwood trees beside him. He had played with the Yankee Stars in an exhibition game back home in Fresno, and he hadn't felt small at all. He pinned the picture up over his bed. He was going to play baseball again, here in the desolate middle of nowhere. First, he would need a playing field. There was plenty of empty space, but it was dotted with sagebrush and clotted with rocks. It didn't look like much of a field. Zenny started by chopping down the plants and digging up the rocks, spending long hours in the blazing sun. "What are you doing, Dad?" his son Howard asked. "Can't play baseball without a field," Zenny grunted. "We're going to play baseball?" Howard grinned and started picking rocks up too. Soon Howard's brother, Harvey, joined them. Then other boys and men drifted to where Zenny and his sons were, bent over in the glaring heat. By the end of the day, dozens of people were working on the field. not planting a crop, but unplanting, making the ground a smooth surface. Once the brush and the biggest rocks had been cleared, Howard and Harvey were ready to set up the bases. "Looks good," Howard said. "We're almost set." Zenny shook his head. "Nowhere close. We're making a real ballpark, and we'll do it right." He walked over to the camp commander's office. 10 minutes later, he emerged into the bright sun, smiling. "We've got it!" He clapped his hands. "What?" asked Howard. "What have we got?" "A bulldozer to level the field," Zenny replied. "The commander said we can borrow the camps." As Zenny drove the bulldozer, crowds gathered to watch. "What's he doing?" an old woman asked her grandson. "He's making a baseball field," the young man answered. "A baseball field? Whatever for?" she asked. Her son smiled. "So we can play." Once the ground had been smoothed, Harvey brought out his bat and ball. "Now we can play, right?" he asked. Zenny shook his head. He still wasn't satisfied. The wind kicked up so much dust from the dry soil that the players would be eating dirt. "We have to do this right." He looked around the camp, hoping to find something to solve the dust problem. Then he got an idea. He diverted an irrigation line to the field and flooded it with water. Once the heat had dried the ground, the dirt was baked into clay. A clean, hard surface without all the dust. "Now, Dad?" asked Howard, tossing a ball between his hands. "It looks great." "Almost," Zen answered, "but we're not there yet." The irrigation line gave Zenny another idea. He laid pipe from the laundry room to the field and planted grass in the infield and quick-growing castor beans along the edge of the outfield. The pipe fed water to the plants, and soon the clay and grass took on the shape of a baseball field with a castor bean fence. Then he smiled. Now it was beginning to look real. "Come on, Dad," Howard urged. "Can we at least mark the bases now?" "Go ahead," Zenny agreed, "but we're not done yet." Howard used flour to chalk the foul lines, and his mom sewed the bases from rice sacks. "It's perfect," Harvey said. "What about the spectators, the fans?" Zenny asked. "Where will they go?" Both boys shrugged. "Can't they just stand around?" Howard asked. "Or we can build rows of bleachers," Zenny said, "like on a real baseball field." That night, Zenny and his son snuck out of their barracks. They were not allowed outside after dark. Zenny felt like a boy again, tiptoeing out of the house with his bat and gloves so his parents wouldn't see him. A guard's light swept across the yard, and Zenny motioned to the boys to flatten themselves against the barracks. They waited for the beam to pass, then crept on. They didn't know that the guard had seen them, but the commander had told him to let them go, so long as they didn't escape. The commander was curious to see what Zenny wanted now. The three of them scrounged wood from the fence surrounding the camp. They removed every other post, careful not to damage the fencing. Then they took the wood from the camp lumberyard. That gave them enough material to build a backstop and 5 rows of bleachers